Hey guys, it's Katie, and I'm here today to do a full series review of the Animorphs series by K.E. Applegate. Those of you that have been here for a while have heard me talk about this series before. I've been reading it for about a year and a half, and I finally finished it, so it's time to tell you guys all about it. So for those of you that don't know what this series is about, it follows these 5 young kids, ultimately 6, but we'll get there later. One day on their way home from the mall, they stumble upon this construction site and ultimately a crashed alien spaceship. And inside the spaceship is an alien known as an Andalite, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a little bit. This Andalite gives these kids this ability called morphing. And basically what this is this blue cube gives them these powers, and the powers are that any animal or really sentient being that they touch, they can acquire their DNA and then they can become that thing for a period of time. And that period of time is only 2 hours. If you stay in a morph for more than 2 hours, you are permanently in that form for the rest of your life. So, as I said before, it follows these 5 kids, and they are Jake, Rachel, Tobias, Cassie, and Marco. And basically what their purpose in life is they are fighting these mind-eating aliens called Yeerks. Yeerks are a parasitic species that enter another species' ear canal, and then they kind of meld themselves and go around your brain and then ultimately control you. And their ultimate purpose is to, take over the world and take over another race so that they can become more powerful than they are. The usual. So what our crew of Animorphs do, because that's ultimately what they end up calling ourselves, is their sole purpose is to fight for the human race. That the only humans on the planet that are not taken over by Yeerks that know about this invasion, and they are fighting this war. So it's the Animorphs versus the Yeerks, and it's really, really fun and interesting because... So let's talk a little bit about the main 5 for a minute. This is written through the perspectives of these 5 kids. Each book is centered on a different POV, and we get to explore the characters in depth through each book. So the order that I mentioned them in earlier, as I said, Jake, Rachel, Tobias, Cassie, and Marco, is the order that each book is written in. So this journey starts with Jake, and Jake has been dubbed by all the others as the leader of this band of rebels, shall we call them. And Jake is the one who makes all the decisions. He's just had a really, he becomes, just watching his journey, it's a ride. But he is, as I said, the leader of the group of them. Then we get into Rachel, and she is known as the Xena warrior. She's really the one that everyone believes she is fearless, and everyone believes that she is kind of the one who truly actually enjoys being part of this war. I mean, we find out later that that's not necessarily the case, but she is just always gung-ho and just ready for action, just ready to launch right in, no nonsense whatsoever. She's just all about that crazy life. Third, we have Tobias, who is honestly my personal favorite. I adore Tobias with my whole being. And he's kind of the outcast character. Like, he had a terrible, terrible life. And we learn quite a bit more about him as time goes on. But remember how I mentioned earlier that if you stay in morph beyond 2 hours, that you permanently become that which you have embodied for the rest of your life? Yeah, Tobias is kind of one of those things. And as I mentioned earlier, we have another alien species called the Andalites. They're the ones that created this morphing technology. And they have a special name for those who stay beyond the 2-hour limit, and they are called Nothlites or Nothlits. I don't know how you necessarily say it. But Tobias in the first book, and this isn't really a spoiler at all because it literally happens in the first book, but Tobias becomes a Nothlit, and he takes the shape of a red-tailed hawk. And he ultimately becomes the eyes and ears for the Animorphs to make sure that no one's coming, no one's trying to intrude on their secrets. He does everything he possibly can with the form that he's in. And the thing about Tobias is that he has a really tragic backstory, and just even as the series goes on, you realize how much more tragic he is. And I love him with my being, okay? Like, I must protect Tobias with everything. And I just love that he was able to have this friend group despite everything. I mean, his struggle is one that's particularly interesting because he's constantly trying to figure out a balance between boy Tobias and hawk Tobias. And that is a struggle for him. Like, we get to see that struggle happen from the very first book, and it continues all the way through the series. Next is Cassie, who I have a very mixed relationship with, but she's known as the peaceful, anti-war kind of a person, but she's also the resident animal expert. His parents are vets, and they do a lot of things with animals, so she's learned a lot through them, how to take care of them, how to identify them. She's just a walking encyclopedia on animals, and it's really, really cool because I learned a lot about animals and certain animals that I didn't know before through reading this series. She's very much, down to earth. I don't want to do this thing because I don't want to hurt anybody. She's just anti-war, anti-genocide, anything. But she ultimately comes to realize that she does what she knows she has to in order to get them to win this war. And then fifth is Marco, and Marco is known as the jokester and the snarky, sassy, class clown type of guy, but he's also more complicated than meets the eye. His mom disappeared when 2 years prior to the start of this book, so it's just him and his dad that are living alone. And Marco is Jake's best friend. So, I mean, they all kind of have different relationships with each other. Like, Rachel is Jake's cousin, and Cassie has a crush on Jake. Marco has a crush on everybody. He's like class clown kind of guy. And Tobias and Rachel kind of have this interesting relationship dynamic thing going on too. So, I mean, they're a very, very interesting group to watch, and it gets even more interesting when another one of my favorite characters gets introduced, and his name is Ax. Aximili Escaruth Estil, I believe is how you say his full name, and he's an Andalite, and his brother is the one who gave the kids this morphing technology. And Ax, they happen to find him in the ocean one day, and because his ship crashed, and then he ends up joining the Animorphs in their fight to save humanity and everything. And it's great to have Ax on their side because he knows the Yeerks, he knows the other alien species that they've interacted with over time, he knows the science, he knows how Andalites think, and just generally how a lot of things work. And so it's really, really great to have him as an added character. Other characters that we meet as time goes on, but those are the main 5. Those are the important ones, besides Visser 3. And Visser 3 is a high-ranking Yeerk, basically. And he is the only Yeerk who has managed to capture an Andalite and use him as a host body. So he actually has the morphing technology and all of this crazy stuff. And he is the main villain of the entire series. But another thing I should mention, and I should have mentioned this earlier, is that how this series should be read. The series is comprised of 64 books, but we don't talk about two of them. Two of them are really bad. Don't read them. They're just garbage. And I'll briefly mention them to you in passing as time goes on, but really don't read them. But so I should really just say that there are 62 in the series instead, because the two, as I said, are not good. But there are 54 books in the main series, then there are 4 Megamorphs and 4 Chronicles. So the 54 main books in the series are just the overarching plot line that has, just about these kids and their different adventure quest things to work on stopping the Yeerks, and also just their everyday interactions with different people and figuring out who's a controller and who isn't and things like that. Then the 4 Megamorphs are definitely very, very interesting. I mean, some of them are along the same lines as this, but they are often told with multiple POVs instead of just through one. And they are often a bigger, grander adventure that is just not meant for the main plot. Like, they're kind of AUs of the actual plot, if that makes any sense. And then we have the 4 Chronicles. There's the Andalite Chronicles, then there's the Hork Bajir Chronicles, then there is the Visser Chronicles, and finally the Ellimist Chronicles. I love all of the Chronicles, and I love all of the Megamorphs. Like, all of them are phenomenal. And then there are the 2 that I'm literally saying are garbage, and you do not read them, just don't read them. And they're called Animorphs, and they're just bad. I didn't even bother reading them because my friend told me just don't. Because they're basically, what they are is they are kind of a create your own adventure, like, side thing, but it's not a true create your own adventure because there's only one possible ending where you're alive. So just don't read them. Okay. But kind of getting back to it all, I'm going to try and break it down. I mean, I already talked about the characters. The world building is really, really great. The writing is very choppy, and I always forget how choppy and simplistic the writing is when I read them, and then I like, the writing is definitely not the strong point of this series, but it definitely gets its point across, and it's written in such a way that it kind of sucks you in, that the writing doesn't really mean anything. And then the plot is fine. Some plot points are annoying and dumb, but for the most part, the overarching plot is interesting and fun and unique. But the strong point is definitely the characters. I mean, my kind of book. And the world building. Those 2 things are definitely these books' strong points. These books, being middle grade, as I don't think I mentioned that, not that it's important, but these books are middle grade, and they handle really difficult topics like PTSD and divorce and death and just all kinds of cruelty and war and just all of these horrible topics. And I was actually reminded by another friend a while back that, children process things differently than we do. I hadn't read these books as a kid, but reading them as an adult, I enjoyed them no less than I would have if I actually got by the weird covers and decided to pick them up, because I always remember seeing them in the Scholastic Book Fairs, and we had this like little bookshop thing. Like, I always remember seeing them, but I never picked them up because I just thought it looked weird, and I was also in my like weird, funky reading phase when these books were coming out, so I was just like not interested in anything. But I'm glad my friend convinced me to read these, because they were definitely very interesting and very entertaining, and I just liked them a lot more than I was expecting. I haven't read a lot of sci-fi books that have kind of captured my interest, but these did, and it's making me want to explore the genre a little more. It's making me less nervous about exploring the genre in more depth because I've just tended to have a little bit more bad luck in terms of reading sci-fi. Like, I love sci-fi movies and TV series, but books I've tended to have a little bit of trouble with. But another thing that this series made me think a lot about, actually, and it kind of amassed in the last couple of books, was just the horrors of war, like things like PTSD and war crimes, and kind of, just the horrors that people go through. And I was talking to my dad about it the other day because it was just on my mind and I couldn't stop thinking about it. But, realizing that both sides could commit all of these atrocities, the same kinds of horrors, genocide, for instance, just sitting back and thinking about those kinds of horrors, usually in history and in almost all cases that I've ever seen, the losing side are the ones that get tried for it and get blamed for their crimes more than the winning side. Like, if you look in history, there are a lot of places that committed all these atrocities and everything, and only one side gets blamed for their crimes. The other side is like, yeah, I just did what I had to do and I'm seen as a war hero. And I just think that's a very interesting thing to think about. I don't know, it just really kind of screwed with my mind a little bit. I don't know. Have you guys read this series? And if you have, there are a lot of things I'd love to talk to you about. I mean the entire series. If you've read the entire series, like, feel free to comment down below or find me on social media or something. And because there are things that I want to talk about that I haven't had a chance to fully absorb yet and are just lingering in my mind all of these days later when I'm filming this. Because, yeah, there are some things that are just really bother me. Or you just shouldn't let yourself sit with it alone, because it's just a lot. But I'd be interested to hear if any of you have read these books, and if so, what you thought about them. And also, just please come talk to me, because I am in major need of needing to talk about them. But yeah, I think I'm gonna end this here. I hope I did an okay enough job of talking about it. Yeah, that's all I've got, I think. So feel free to subscribe, comment, follow me on social media. I have a Twitter and a Goodreads, which are both linked below. I'll come back with another video for you guys again soon. Okay, bye.